The unthinkable. When your own country detains you, imagine this if you will. You are an American, born and raised. This is your home. You have a passport, a driver's license, maybe even a social security card tucked away safely. You pay your taxes, you vote. You might even, occasionally sing the national anthem with a perplexing amount of off-key enthusiasm. Then, one day, someone representing your own government looks you in the eye, questions your very identity, and locks you up. Sounds like a plot from a rather bleak dystopian movie, doesn't it? Perhaps one you'd watch, then immediately try to forget with a large tub of ice cream. Unfortunately, this isn't fiction. This isn't a far-fetched scenario cooked up in Hollywood. This is happening, right here, in the United States of America, the land of the free, home of the brave, and apparently, the place where your citizenship can be terrifyingly fragile if you happen to encounter a particularly zealous federal agent. The agency at the heart of these nightmares, more often than not, is Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Yes, ICE, an agency whose very name conjures images of raids, fear, and a bureaucratic coldness that chills you to the bone, and not in a refreshing, ice-cold beverage on a hot day kind of way. Their stated mission involves protecting national security and upholding public safety by enforcing immigration laws. That sounds reasonable enough on paper, doesn't it? Like something a government agency should do. But what happens when that mission becomes so twisted, so aggressively pursued, that it starts ensnaring the very citizens it's supposed to protect? What happens when the pursuit of enforcement tramples all over fundamental rights, due process, and basic human decency? You get stories that should shock every single American to their core, stories that make you question who exactly is being protected, and from what. This isn't about abstract legal arguments or political debates happening far away. This is about real people, American citizens, finding themselves caught in a bureaucratic meat grinder. It's about the terror of being told you don't belong in your own country. It's about the realization that the systems designed to protect you can, in an instant, turn against you with devastating force. And if it can happen to them, the uncomfortable truth we must confront is that it could, under the wrong circumstances, happen to anyone. So, let's talk about it. Because ignoring it won't make it go away, it will only let it fester. Angelica Bowman, an American citizen treated like a foreign threat. Meet Angelica Bowman. She's 22 years old. A young woman, presumably with dreams, plans, and the kind of minor daily annoyances we all experience, like finding out your favorite socks have a hole. Crucially, Angelica Bowman is a United States citizen, born in this country. Not kind of a citizen, not citizen-ish, but a full-fledged, red-blooded American. This isn't a complicated concept, it's usually quite straightforward. You're either a citizen or you're not. Angelica is. End of story, right? Oh, if only. Adding another layer to this American story, Angelica is the daughter of Alma Bowman. Alma is a U.S. military veteran. Yes, you heard that correctly. A woman who served this country, who wore its uniform, presumably pledging to defend its constitution and its values. Now picture that veteran learning that her own American daughter has been detained by an agency of the very government she served. The irony is so thick you could spread it on toast, though it would taste incredibly bitter and unjust. This is the kind of situation that makes you want to scream into a pillow or perhaps directly at a government building. Angelica's story unfolds in South Carolina, not a war-torn nation, not a disputed territory, but a state firmly within the borders of the USA. She was, by all accounts, just living her life. The kind of life any 22-year-old American might be living, perhaps thinking about her future, her career, or what to watch on Netflix that evening. Little did she know that her citizenship, her very belonging, was about to be aggressively questioned and temporarily revoked by officials who seemed to have skipped the basic rights section of their training manual. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity that was quickly cleared up with a polite apology. No, this was a descent into a bureaucratic rabbit hole that should send shivers down your spine. Angelica Bowman, an American citizen, daughter of a veteran, was treated not as a valued member of society, but as a foreign threat, a suspect in her own country. Her experience is a stark warning about what can happen when unchecked power meets a climate of suspicion, and when common sense takes an extended vacation, possibly to a country with clearer rules about detaining its own people. Expired tags, expired rights, the absurdity of Angelica's arrest. So what heinous crime did Angelica Bowman commit to warrant being swept up by ICE, an agency supposedly focused on immigration enforcement? Was she masterminding an international spy ring, smuggling contraband kittens, plotting to replace all coffee in South Carolina with decaf? No, nothing quite so dramatic or even mildly interesting. Angelica was initially stopped by local law enforcement for a minor infraction, an expired vehicle tag. Yes, an expired tag, the kind of thing that usually results in a sigh, a fine, and a mental note to visit the DMV, that temple of bureaucratic joy. But this routine traffic stop took a dark and frankly bizarre turn. Instead of issuing a ticket or whatever the standard procedure is for an expired tag in South Carolina, local law enforcement decided to hand Angelica over to ICE. Let that sink in for a moment. An expired tag somehow became a matter for federal immigration authorities. Why? That's an excellent question, one that local police should be answering repeatedly and under bright lights if necessary. This escalation from a trivial traffic issue to a federal detention is, to put it mildly, utterly baffling and deeply concerning. Now you might think, okay, a mistake was made, but surely once she showed her ID, her proof of citizenship, this whole mess was cleared up, right? Wrong again. Angelica Bowman presented valid identification. She provided proof that she is, in fact, an American citizen. The kind of proof that should have ended the encounter immediately, perhaps with an embarrassed apology from the officers involved. But her documents, her claims, her very identity as an American, were apparently disregarded, ignored, deemed less important than, well, it's hard to say what. As a result, Angelica, the U.S. citizen, the veteran's daughter, was detained. Not for a few confusing minutes, not for an hour or two while things were sorted out. She was detained for days. Days spent in custody, her freedom denied, her rights violated. It was only after legal pressure mounted and media attention began to shine a harsh spotlight on this outrageous situation that she was finally released. Think about that. It took lawyers and news reports for a U.S. citizen to be freed from the custody of her own government after being arrested for an expired tag. This isn't just a procedural hiccup, it's a 5-alarm fire for civil liberties. Not an isolated incident, the disturbing pattern of ICE overreach. It would be comforting in a bleak sort of way to believe that Angelica Bowman's ordeal was a freak occurrence. A terrible, unfortunate mistake, an isolated incident, the bureaucratic equivalent of a rogue asteroid hitting a very specific, very unlucky individual. But sadly, no. Angelica's story is not unique. It is instead a chilling example of a much larger systemic problem. A deeply disturbing pattern of ICE overreach that has seen numerous U.S. citizens caught in its dragnet, their lives turned upside down by the very agency that should have no jurisdiction over them whatsoever. The grim reality is that since ICE was cobbled together in 2003, in that post-9/11 flurry of government reorganization, thousands, yes, thousands, of American citizens have reportedly been detained. Some have even been removed from the country, or had detainers, which are requests to local law enforcement to hold individuals, lodged against them. Let that number sink in. Thousands of people who hold American citizenship, the highest claim to belonging in this nation, have been treated as if they were undocumented immigrants subject to detention and potential deportation by their own government. This isn't a rounding error, it's a recurring nightmare. This isn't a new phenomenon confined to one political administration, though certain policies can definitely pour gasoline on an already smoldering fire. The deportation of U.S. citizens, while horrifying, has occurred under various presidents. However, the frequency, the brazenness, and the sheer visibility of these constitutional abuses seem to have escalated in recent years, particularly under policies that emphasized aggressive, widespread immigration enforcement and set alarmingly high arrest targets for ICE agents. When you're trying to hit a quota, apparently, due diligence can become an optional extra. So, Angelica's case isn't just about Angelica, it's a symptom of a diseased system. A system where the lines between legitimate immigration enforcement and the harassment of citizens have become dangerously blurred. A system where the assumption of innocence, a cornerstone of American justice, seems to be suspended when ICE gets involved, especially if your name sounds a certain way or your skin has a certain tone. This pattern reveals not just individual errors in judgment, but a fundamental systemic failure to respect and uphold the most basic rights of American citizens, and that should worry absolutely everyone. Section 5, Leonardo Garcia Venegas, another citizen, another nightmare, same old story. If you thought Angelica Bowman's case was an outlier, allow me to introduce you to Leonardo Garcia Venegas. He's 25 years old, and surprise, surprise, he is also a United States citizen. His story echoes Angelica's in its injustice, its absurdity, and its sheer infuriating wrongness. Leonardo found himself in ICE's crosshairs in Foley, Baldwin County, Alabama. Not at a border crossing, not engaged in any suspicious activity, but at a construction site where he was working. Just trying to earn a living like millions of other Americans do every single day. The circumstances of Leonardo's detention are, if possible, even more indicative of a system running amok. ICE agents were conducting an immigration raid at the construction site. During this raid, they approached Leonardo. He, like Angelica, had proof of his citizenship. In fact, he presented his real ID. You know, that federally approved extra secure form of identification that, as of May 7, 2025, is mandatory for things like air travel and accessing federal buildings. The very document designed to be a gold standard of identification. And what did the ICE agents allegedly say? They claimed his real ID was fake. Yes, fake. So what happened next? Did they take a closer look? Did they run it through a system? Did they perhaps consider that a U.S. citizen might actually have a valid government-issued real ID? Of course not. Don't be silly. Instead, Leonardo Garcia Venegas, a U.S. citizen, was reportedly wrestled to the ground. He was handcuffed, an experience that left him with soreness and visible marks. He was then detained for hours. Hours of his life stolen, his dignity assaulted, his citizenship questioned, all because ICE agents decided his official ID was a forgery. His undocumented brother was also detained, but Leonardo's detention stands as a stark example of citizen abuse. And what was the official justification for this manhandling and detention of an American citizen? The Department of Homeland Security later accused Garcia Venegas of interfering with their arrest operation. So, presenting your valid U.S. real ID, and perhaps understandably questioning why you're being targeted in an immigration raid when you are a citizen, now constitutes interference. This is the kind of circular logic that makes your head spin. No charges were filed against Leonardo. He was eventually released after providing his social security number, but the damage was done. Another citizen, another nightmare, fueled by the same systemic disregard for rights. Section 6. The systemic rot, racial profiling and constitutional contempt within ICE. When you look at the stories of Angelica Bowman and Leonardo Garcia Venegas and countless others like them, a disturbing common thread begins to emerge. It's a thread woven with the ugly fibers of racial profiling. Both Angelica and Leonardo are of Hispanic descent, and in case after case it appears that U.S. citizens who are black or brown, particularly those of Latin American heritage, are disproportionately targeted by ICE, their citizenship doubted, their rights dismissed far more readily than their white counterparts. This isn't just bad luck. It's a pattern that strongly suggests prejudice is playing a significant role in these detentions. This isn't just about hurt feelings or perceived slights, this is about fundamental constitutional rights being violated on a grand scale. The Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is supposed to protect against unreasonable searches and seizures. Being detained without probable cause, especially when you've presented proof of citizenship, seems like a textbook example of an unreasonable seizure. The Fifth Amendment guarantees due process of law. Being locked up for days like Angelica, or wrestled to the ground and detained for hours, like Leonardo, without any legitimate basis, makes a mockery of due process. It's as if these amendments are optional guidelines when ICE is involved. There appears to be a culture within ICE, or at least significant pockets of it, that exhibits a profound disregard for these legal rights, a contempt for the very Constitution its officers swear to uphold. When a real ID, the government's own supposedly secure document, is dismissed as fake without proper verification, it signals an agency operating with an alarming degree of impunity. It suggests a mindset where suspicion trumps proof, and where the default assumption for certain individuals is guilty until proven innocent, or even worse, foreign until proven American beyond any shadow of an agent's doubt. Let's call this what it is. This isn't just aggressive law enforcement. This is, as the brief for this very essay rightly points out, state-sponsored harassment. It's an abuse of power that targets individuals based on their appearance or perceived ethnicity. It's a system that seems to have forgotten that its primary duty is to the law, not to arbitrary arrest quotas or prejudiced assumptions. The rot within ICE isn't just on the surface. It appears to be systemic, deeply embedded, and incredibly dangerous to the fabric of a free society. Section 7. Families shattered, freedoms crushed, the true cost of ICE's reign. The detention of a U.S. citizen by ICE isn't just a line item in a government report or a brief shocking news story. It's an earthquake that rips through families, leaving behind a trail of devastation, fear, and profound emotional distress. Think of Alma Bowman, Angelica's mother, a military veteran who served her country, only to see her American daughter treated like a criminal by that same country's agents. Can you imagine her anguish, her fury, her sense of betrayal, the pride of service clashing with the horror of injustice inflicted upon her own child? It's a cruel, almost unthinkable irony. And what about Leonardo Garcia Venegas and his family? He and his cousin expressed sadness and fear over the racial profiling they experienced. His family's business was impacted because they became afraid of further discrimination. This fear is a corrosive acid. It eats away at trust, at community cohesion, at the sense of security that every American deserves to feel in their own homeland. When citizens start to fear their own government, not because they've done anything wrong, but because of who they are or what they look like, then something is fundamentally broken in our democracy. The implications go far beyond the individuals directly detained. These incidents send a chilling message to entire communities, particularly immigrant communities and communities of color. The message is, your rights are conditional, your citizenship is precarious, you are always under suspicion. This creates a climate of anxiety where people are afraid to interact with law enforcement even when they are victims of crime, for fear that any encounter could lead to detention or deportation, regardless of their legal status or citizenship. Is this the kind of society we want to build? One where fear dictates daily life for so many? Ultimately, what's at stake here is the very essence of American freedom and the integrity of our constitutional rights. These aren't abstract concepts, they are the bedrock of our nation. When a government agency can detain its own citizens with such apparent ease, based on flimsy pretexts or outright prejudice, it erodes those foundations. It normalizes the unacceptable. Each unlawful detention, each ignored proof of citizenship, each family traumatized, is another chip taken out of the edifice of American liberty. And if we don't stop it, that edifice will eventually crumble. Section 8. Beyond repair? Why reform is a band-aid on a bullet wound. Whenever an agency like ICE is caught in yet another scandal, engaging in yet another egregious overreach, the calls for reform inevitably begin. We need better training, some will cry. More oversight, others will demand. Stricter guidelines will be the sensible-sounding suggestion from well-meaning commentators. And yes, on the surface, these all sound like perfectly reasonable responses. Who wouldn't want better training or more oversight? It's like saying you want puppies to be cuter, it's hard to argue against. However, when you look at the sheer scope and nature of the problems plaguing ICE, the systemic racial profiling, the routine disregard for constitutional rights, the detention of actual U.S. citizens, you have to ask, is reform really enough? Can you truly reform an agency whose very culture seems at times to be predicated on suspicion and aggression, often directed at the wrong people? It's like trying to reform a shark into a vegetarian. You can give it all the seaweed salads you want, but at its core, it's still a shark, with a shark's instincts. The Trump administration's policies certainly threw fuel on this fire, with aggressive immigration enforcement tactics and daily arrest targets reportedly reaching 1,200 to 1,500. When agents are pressured to meet quotas, due process and careful verification of citizenship can easily become secondary concerns, if not outright obstacles. But to lay all the blame on one administration would be to miss the deeper structural issues. ICE was created in 2003, and the problem of U.S. citizens being wrongfully detained has been documented, albeit perhaps less visibly, across different administrations. The potential for abuse seems baked into its DNA. The argument for dismantling ICE, rather than merely attempting to reform it, stems from this fundamental concern, that an agency with such a broad mandate, operating with such a degree of power and often under a veil of limited transparency, poses an inherent threat to civil liberties, especially when its actions so frequently demonstrate a pattern of overreach against citizens themselves. Perhaps the functions it performs, those that are truly necessary and lawful, could be reassigned to other agencies with better track records and stricter constitutional safeguards. Because right now, trying to reform ICE feels like applying a band-aid to a gaping, infected wound. It might look like you're doing something, but the infection continues to spread. Section 9. A nation at a crossroads, demanding accountability and American ideals. The continued detention of U.S. citizens by ICE, exemplified by the harrowing experiences of Angelica Bowman and Leonardo Garcia Venegas, is not just a series of unfortunate bureaucratic errors. It is a profound assault on core American ideals, the promise of justice, the sanctity of liberty, and the fundamental right to be secure in one's person and papers, especially when those papers scream U.S. citizen. This is a moment that calls not for quiet headshaking or resigned acceptance, but for loud, unwavering, and persistent demands for accountability. For Angelica, for Leonardo, for every citizen who has faced this terrifying ordeal. We must demand that every instance of a U.S. citizen being unlawfully detained by ICE is thoroughly investigated, not by ICE itself in some internal review that mysteriously finds no wrongdoing, but by independent bodies. There must be real consequences for agents and officials who violate constitutional rights and departmental policies. Apologies are insufficient. Financial settlements, while necessary for the victims, don't fix the systemic issues. What's needed is a clear message that such abuses will not be tolerated, and that adherence to the Constitution is not optional for federal law enforcement. The good news, if you can call it that in such a grim context, is that public awareness and outrage are growing. Media outlets are shining a light on these cases. Civil rights advocates and immigration scholars are sounding the alarm with increasing urgency. Lawyers are fighting these battles in court, and numerous lawsuits have been filed by advocacy groups, and even states challenging aggressive and unconstitutional immigration policies. This public pressure is vital. It's what forces change. It's what makes the comfortable uncomfortable, which is often a prerequisite for progress. Ultimately, America stands at a crossroads. Will we allow an agency to operate with such flagrant disregard for the rights of its own people? Will we accept a reality where your citizenship can be nullified by an expired tag and an agent's unsupported suspicion? Or will we stand up and declare that this is not who we are, that our constitutional guarantees are not mere suggestions, and that an agency so prone to abusing its power has forfeited its legitimacy? The calls to dismantle ICE are not radical. They are a rational response to an agency that has, time and again, proven itself to be a threat to the very citizens it should never have the power to detain. It's time to reclaim our ideals.